A dying man in a Barbados bedroom, a maid at the door, holding a letter. Inside it, a confession. Her husband of 30 years had told another woman he meant to kill his wife, rather than let her outlive him. Claudette Colbert would read those words standing feet from his bedside, and walk out of the room without saying a single word to him. She was, by then, the highest-paid woman in America, an Oscar winner, a star so exacting about her own image that entire film sets were rebuilt around a single rule. Only her left cheek could ever face a camera. To the industry, she was untouchable glamour, sophistication itself. But behind that polished profile was a woman shaped by a mother who could never bring herself to say she was proud of her, a marriage kept secret from her own family, a rival she was accused of loving and hated being accused of loving, and a final act of betrayal from the people closest to her that she took to her grave. This is the story Hollywood never quite told about Claudette Colbert. Welcome to Classic Hollywood Echoes. She was born Lily Chauchuan on September 13, 1903, in a quiet suburb just outside Paris, the second child of a banker whose investments never quite paid off and a mother who never let him forget it. Her mother, Jane, had wanted to be an opera singer. She believed she'd have made it too, if she hadn't married a man with more dreams than direction. That resentment didn't stay contained to her marriage. It spilled onto her daughter. Lily adored her father, and in her mother's eyes, that was proof she'd inherited every quality Jean despised in him. Even a family baptism turned into a small battle of wills. Jean wanted to name her daughter after a British stage actress she admired, but the parish priest refused. No saint by that name existed. A compromise was found on paper, but to everyone in the family, she stayed Lily. It's a detail that says more than it seems to. From birth, there were two versions of her, the one written down and the one actually lived. It would become the pattern of her entire life. The family emigrated to New York when Lily was 8, settling into a Manhattan apartment near Central Park. She picked up English fast, thanks in part to an English-speaking grandmother, and she found something at school that felt like hers alone: the stage. Poetry recitation, breath control, the rhythm of language, skills built in a classroom that would, without her knowing it yet, prepare a future film actress for a lifetime of scripts. Then, at 15, an accident that could have ended everything. Late coming home from swimming lessons, she stepped off a curb into the path of an oncoming truck. A broken ankle, a broken knee, spinal injuries severe enough to keep her bedridden for 4 months, on crutches for 5 more, with back pain that would follow her for the rest of her life. She later admitted something startling about that recovery. The attention she got from visiting friends and teachers, propped up in bed, became its own kind of performance. "I even dramatized my illness," she said, "and clung to the cane long after I really needed it." An actress was already forming, long before anyone paid her to be one. It was around this time she started going by her middle name instead, Claudette. By 19, she'd landed a small role at a Greenwich Village playhouse in an experimental anti-war piece. It wasn't much, a handful of lines, but it was enough to convince her she needed real training. She enrolled in art classes to study painting, funding her lessons by working as a dressmaker's assistant and giving French lessons for a few dollars an hour. Those painting lessons taught her something she'd use for the rest of her career. Human faces aren't symmetrical. One side is almost always more defined, more flattering, more finished than the other. She studied her own face in that light and decided her left side was the one worth showing the world. It would harden, later, into an obsession, but it started as an artist's observation, not a diva's demand. Her real break came through a chance introduction at a cocktail party, landing her a minor Broadway role that paid $50 a week, a fortune for a bit part in 1923. Before she stepped onto that stage, though, her mother insisted on one more change: a new surname, not from their family tree, but borrowed wholesale from Louis XIV's finance minister, Colbert. It sounded distinguished, it sounded profitable. And profit, more than pride, was what her mother was truly after. From that point on, Jean would manage her daughter's finances and treat her career less like an artistic calling and more like a business she happened to own. The reviews for her Broadway debut barely mentioned her, but a producer named Al Woods spotted something the critics missed, signed her on the spot, and spent the better part of 6 years putting her in production after production, the practical education no drama school could offer. Slowly, steadily, audiences started noticing her even when the critics didn't. In 1927, a play called The Barker gave her both her longest Broadway run yet, and her co-star, a young actor named Norman Foster. On stage they had chemistry. Off stage, it turned into what she'd later call, in her own words, un grand amour, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of love. They married in London in 1928, and they told no one back home, not even her mother. When the truth came out, the marriage itself became almost a scandal by its sheer unconventionality. Colbert continued living in her mother's Central Park apartment. Foster stayed at a men's club across town. To the fan magazines, it was spun as sophisticated, European, modern, separate incomes, separate addresses, still very much in love. The truth was blunter. Jean refused to let Foster set foot in her home, and Claudette wasn't willing to fight her mother hard enough to change that. It was the only arrangement that kept the peace. Her brother Charles despised Foster too, a resentment that would later turn violent. When Charles once caught Foster during a visit, he beat him badly enough to break his nose. Colbert took her own husband to get medical treatment from a surgeon, a decision that, without her knowing it yet, would quietly rewrite the rest of her life. The 1929 stock market crash hollowed out Broadway's golden run of nightly sold-out houses. Colbert, like most stage actors of the era, started looking west. She'd already dipped a toe into silent film, an experience with a young, then unknown director named Frank Capra that went so badly she swore she'd never work in pictures again. She would eat those words, repeatedly. By the early 1930s, she'd relocated fully to Hollywood, joining Paramount, the most European of the major studios, the one built to sell audiences a fantasy of Parisian sophistication. She was, quite literally, the genuine article. French-born, French-accented, effortlessly elegant in a way no studio makeup department could manufacture. It made her indispensable, and it made her expensive. It also placed her directly opposite the studio's other reigning European star, Marlene Dietrich. The two women were rarely, by most accounts, more than polite colleagues who happened to share a lot and a fan base. But in 1935, at a beach party thrown by Carole Lombard, a photographer caught them together on a slide in a pose the tabloids seized on instantly. The rumor of an affair between them never fully died, not helped by Dietrich's own well-known relationships with women, nor by Dietrich later publicly calling Colbert ugly and dismissively shopgirl French. Whatever affection existed between them seems to have run in one direction only, and not kindly. Colbert's own account, given only decades later, was more measured. They were, she said, barely acquainted. What she did finally confirm, long after the fact, was something else entirely. The rumored affair with her It Happened One Night co-star, Clark Gable, during filming, true. That confirmation is worth pausing on, because It Happened One Night wasn't even a role Colbert wanted. She thought the studio, Columbia, was beneath her. A Poverty Row outfit her own co-star openly nicknamed Siberia. She took the part mainly because it paid double her usual Paramount fee, and promised to wrap in 4 weeks flat. She and Gable, she admitted, spent much of the shoot privately wondering who on earth would want to watch a film about two people bickering their way across America on a bus, in the middle of the Depression, when audiences wanted glamour, not grit. She was wrong. The film swept the Oscars in 1935. Picture, director, screenplay, actor, and actress. But Colbert wasn't in the room to hear her own name called. Certain she had no chance against a surprise write-in nominee, Bette Davis. She'd already boarded a train out of town. The studio scrambled to physically pull her off it. She almost refused to turn back, reportedly because she had nothing suitable to wear to receive an award she didn't expect to win. She relented only once someone convinced her what the win could do for her career, made a brief appearance, accepted the statuette from a young Shirley Temple, and was back on her train within the hour. It's a strange irony that would repeat itself 15 years later. In 1950, she was producer Joseph Mankiewicz's first choice to play the aging stage star Margot Channing in All About Eve, a role tailor-made, by her own account, for exactly the kind of woman she'd become. A back injury forced her out just before filming began. The part went, once again, to Bette Davis. Colbert later admitted, with more resignation than bitterness, that she'd simply never had the luck to play a real villain. By 1938, Claudette Colbert was the highest-paid actress in America, over $400,000 a year, richer than most of Hollywood's men, and the demands that came with that success were, by any measure, real. She insisted entire sets be reconfigured so cameras only ever caught her left profile, the side she'd studied and decided was her better one back in art class years earlier. The unlucky right side of her face reportedly earned its own nickname on set, the dark side of the moon. She fought for, and won, contractual approval over every publicity photo of herself after a co-star was caught groping her on camera during a shoot, a clause that protected her but also cemented her reputation as difficult to work with. She once refused to continue filming until a preferred cameraman was reinstated, even offering to personally cover any budget overrun herself. None of this happened in a vacuum. This was an era when male stars threw tantrums and got called passionate, while women who set the same boundaries got called divas. And Colbert knew exactly what game she was playing. She was, by every account of people who actually worked closely with her, also a shrewd businesswoman who understood her own value in an industry built to underpay women the moment their leverage looked shaky. Her marriage to Norman Foster didn't survive the decade. The surgeon who treated her husband's broken nose, Dr. Joel Pressman, became something Foster never fully recovered from. Colbert and Pressman began an affair while he was still, technically, treating her husband's injuries. She filed for divorce in 1935. Foster remarried within the year. Colbert and Pressman married soon after, and by most accounts, it was the steadiest, calmest relationship of her life. A private man content to stay out of the spotlight his wife commanded so completely. Into that steadiness walked a woman named Verna Hull, an heiress turned painter who'd previously been romantically linked to both Dietrich and Greta Garbo. Hull became Colbert's companion and unofficial chauffeur, and her presence unsettled almost everyone around her. Pressman despised her. Colbert's housekeeper despised her. Between themselves, they had a private nickname for her, the Monster. Hull's fixation on Colbert grew intense enough that Pressman eventually had a physical barrier built between their properties. It didn't stop her, and Colbert, despite everyone around her, kept her close anyway. That decision would matter more than anyone knew, right up until the very end. In 1967, Pressman was diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. Colbert arranged for Frank Sinatra's private jet to fly her dying husband home to Barbados so he could spend his final days with her, and she kept vigil at his bedside as his condition worsened. Then came the letter. Verna Hull sent it through the housekeeper, insisting Colbert read it alone, immediately. Inside, Hull's claim that Pressman had told her, during some earlier confrontation, that he intended to kill his wife rather than leave her behind to live without him. Whether that threat was ever real, or a final act of cruelty from a woman who'd never accepted losing Colbert's attention, is impossible to know for certain. What is certain is what Colbert did next. She read the letter standing feet from her dying husband's bed, and walked out without a word to him. She threw Hull off the island for good, hurling back every gift she'd ever received from her, and never spoke to her again. Pressman died shortly after. Whatever passed between husband and wife in his final hours, Colbert never spoke of it publicly. Her mother and brother died in rapid succession after Pressman, and in the wake of all that loss, something unexpected happened. Colbert described feeling, for the first time in her adult life, liberated, free of the family that had managed and monetized nearly every decision she'd ever made. She returned to acting, finally reconciled publicly with Frank Capra, the director she'd once vowed never to work with again, inducting him into the AFI Hall of Fame decades after that disastrous first collaboration. And she finally confirmed, at long last, what Hollywood had whispered about for over 50 years. Yes, there had been something real with Clark Gable. Dietrich. She took to her grave without further comment. She spent her final years in Barbados with her closest friend, a retired department store executive named Helen O'Hagan, whom she'd asked her circle to embrace with the same warmth they'd once shown Pressman. She swam daily in the ocean she loved more than the island itself. She never had children. A decision she confided, near the end of her life, had been shaped by her mother's own insistence, decades earlier, that motherhood would ruin the glamorous image Jane had built for her. Claudette Colbert died in 1996, at 92, after a series of small strokes. She was, to the very last, still doing her own makeup. She was wearing it when she passed. Her ashes were laid to rest in Barbados, beside her mother and her second husband, the two people who, in very different ways, had shaped and haunted her entire life. It's easy to remember Claudette Colbert as Hollywood called her, difficult, demanding, a diva who'd only ever show one side of her face. But underneath that reputation was a woman who spent her whole life being managed by people who claimed to love her, a mother who couldn't say she was proud, a companion who wouldn't let go, a husband whose devotion may have curdled into something far darker at the very end. She built an empire on her own terms in an industry that rarely let women do that, and she never got to decide, entirely for herself, who got to stand close enough to hurt her. I hope you enjoyed this look at Claudette Colbert's life. If there's another Golden Age star whose story deserves a closer look, let me know in the comments, and until next time, sweet dreams.